Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Lynn and today I'll be flipping the Spellbinders January 2024 club kits. I don't get all of the club kits, but in this video I'll be featuring actually quite a fair few of them that I actually get. So here's a quick look at the cards that I'll be making in this video, and as per usual I'll be making at least one flat, one layered, one interactive, and one pop-up card. The interactive card is a Jacob's Ladder card. It's a little bit hard to show how this mechanism works on my top-down camera, so I did film this footage separately just so that you can kind of see how it works, and it's one where I think it helps to kind of see the end result before you actually make it, because then you'll have an idea for where we're headed. And of course, I will go through step by step on how to make each of these cards. I will bookmark this video so that if there is a particular card that you want to see me make, you can skip straight ahead to that section of this video, because my flip videos do tend to be a little bit long, and I understand that you don't have necessarily all the time in the world to watch the whole thing. I appreciate it if you do though, so thank you in advance. And I'll be crafting with the clear stamp of the month, the Better Press Club, the Wax Seal Club, the small die of the month, and the large die of the month. I think the only kits that I didn't craft with that I do get are the Glimmer of the month and the stencil of the month. So, oh, I forgot to mention the 3D embossing folder. I crafted with that on the interactive card. So I will have definitely a follow-up video featuring the Glimmer of the month and the stencil of the month as well. So without further ado, let's make these. Okay, so getting started with my flat card, and this is pretty rare for me. I'm actually going to make a truly flat card. I am going to stamp directly onto my card base, and the other rare thing about this card is going to be that I am going to use a lot of white space. I'm trying to embrace clean and simple, and trying to be a little bit more comfortable with leaving a lot of white space. Often when I see so much white space on my card, I feel like it's incomplete. And I really struggle with that urge to just keep adding things to it. So I am trying to kind of break out of that mindset. What I am going to do is just stamp a really simple, lovely sentiment from the clear stamp of the month. This month's clear stamp is sort of bee honey themed, and there are a lot of sort of punny sentiments that go along with it. I also die cut out of foam this sort of drippy honey, what would normally be a die cut, and it's the add-on that actually complements the large die of the month, but I die cut it out of foam so that I could create a stamp from it. And that way I can stamp this like really gorgeous drippy honey right off the top of my card base, and it kind of gives it a little bit of a splash of color, a little bit of interest, and it's sort of filling that need of leaving it completely empty by still adding something that's maybe a little bit unexpected, and that's actually going to be it for my card. It was really hard to stop it at that, but I definitely want to really embrace clean and simple, truly clean and simple, and so I have left it at that. I am wondering though, kind of looking back, if maybe I should have stamped the bee in that same honey color just to balance the card a little bit more. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below. Okay, so now moving on to my layered card, and I'm actually going to make two, but it's more of a make one get one free kind of deal because I am going to be inking up this gorgeous Better Press plate. It is a poppy flower, which is really, really pretty and very large too. This is a really, really large design. It takes up pretty much the entire A2 card front. And what I'm actually going to attempt to do, I don't think I've done this before. I am going to do a multi press with this press plate. So what I'm aiming to do here is to just ink up in my first color, which will be green. And I am just trying to get the stems and the leaves on these flowers, and I'm using just a bit of scrap cardstock to mask off the flowers, or basically block off anywhere that I don't want green ink. And then I'm going to run this press through, and I'm actually going to run this through on watercolor card. For this first panel that I'm using, watercolor card wasn't really necessary. I didn't really think that through because I'll actually use it for my next card, and you'll see how in a moment. But to complete this design, now I'm going to go through and taking two shades of sort of like a pink and a red, I am inking up the flower portion of this design. And so again, I'm trying to be careful not to get the red ink on the what was previously stamped in green. It's a little bit hard to do, so if it's a little imperfect, I am kind of okay with it. They'll just mix together and maybe form a bit of a brown, but I think that's okay, and I'll run it through a second time. And so I get this gorgeous effect of basically a two-tone pressing. So because there's so much ink left on that plate, what I decided to do was just give it a spritz of water all over. And this is why I chose watercolor paper, so that I can press it into watercolor paper. And that paper is meant to really absorb a lot of water. I didn't actually use a lot of water, I just gave it a light spritzing. So if you wanted to just use the cotton card, I think that would work just fine. And if you wanted to just use cardstock, it would probably work okay too. The thing with watercolor paper and the 100% cotton paper is that it's a little bit more porous, so it feels like it absorbs that water and you don't get puddling in the same way that you might see with just normal cardstock, especially cardstock that's really slick, that's super smooth. So the last thing that I'll do to finish up both of these panels is to use one of the two sentiments that does come included. I chose to use the thank you sentiment because I seem to always feel like I have a need for thank you cards, so I really like having a lot of these on hand. And the second sentiment that does come along with is best wishes, which is another really great one for any occasion as well. And I do want this to be super crystal clear and legible. So even on the panel where I watercolored, like I did the spritzing, I am not going to spritz on that one because I don't want the sentiment to have that watercolor effect. I think the watercolor effect is really nice for the floral portion, but the sentiment I do want to be nice and crisp, so I didn't spritz that. So it's a nice way to, before you clean off your stamps, to just give it a spritz. And I did use the Sukaneko Versa Magic inks when I did this. So those are a water-based ink, and that's why the spritzing technique works well. This wouldn't work quite as well with the Spellbinders Better Press inks because those are dye inks that are solvent based. I don't know, maybe you could spritz them with alcohol because that is a form of solvent, but I don't know what that would really do. So I do know how water-based inks like your Versacolor and Versamagic work when you spritz with water, and so I figured this was a safe bet. I'd never tried it before, and it worked out just fine. So I would just explore and have fun with that. I kind of like both. I feel like the first press, which is really crisp, super clear, you get that beautiful emboss. And this is Spellbinders watercolor cardstock, which is wonderful. I think it's 110 pound. So really great, pretty close in terms of thickness to the Spellbinders 100% cotton card. That is, I think, 118 as compared to 110. So really close, and so you still get with the watercolor panels that really nice deboss that is so lovely with better pressing. And to finish up my cards, all I've done is taken some solid color cardstock. This is Fern by Spellbinders. I go through Fern a lot. This is the only color cardstock I think I've had to purchase I think 3 or 4 packs at this point. So even though this isn't a specialty card, I still got it at the center because I seem to go through this so much. And so I just want to reserve that cardstock in the middle, since most of it's getting covered by the panel anyways. There's just a very, very, very thin margin because you can't really trim that much off of this design without losing some of it. It's that large. So I think I cut the panels down to, I think it was 4 1/16, and 5, well, basically 3/16 of an inch is how much I took off from both the width and the height. Okay, so now my interactive card. Let me again show you the Jacob's Ladder card. So it all folds down like this. It expands and drops down to reveal, in this case, 6 panels that are 4 1/4 wide by 3 1/2 inches tall. So each of these panels is 4 1/4 wide by 3 1/2 tall. And they are connected with ribbons that allow you to kind of play with this in such a way that it then flips. Like these panels flip back and forth when you kind of tilt the top. It's really, really fun. There are toys, I think there are wooden toys. In my childhood, I remember them being wooden blocks. And it's really fun. It's so cool, pretty easy to make. It takes a lot of prep work though. I will say this card took the longest to create, but it's a lot of fun. And once you see how it's made, you'll see how simple the mechanism is, but I think you'll probably also appreciate how much work can go into it, just because there's basically, even though you see 6 cards, the front and the back have to be decorated. So I'm starting off with 6 panels of white that have been cut to 4 1/4 wide by 3 1/2 tall. And I've got 6 other panels cut from various shades of pink and reds. And I've got my brown satin ribbon that is 1/4 inch wide. And what I'm doing on this first panel here is I am just marking the edge of where I want my ribbon to get attached. And because I want this to be landscape oriented, I want my ribbon to run down that short length. So down the 3 1/2 inch length. To determine how long of a stretch of ribbon you'll need, just take whichever kind of direction you want your ribbon to run. You want to take that and multiply it by 11. and if you want to be safe, you can multiply by 12, but you really just need 11 lengths worth. And to transfer these lines, I'm only transferring the lines on the 6 white cards, and I just use my T-square ruler, line it up with 1, and then draw a line across 2 or 3 additional panels after that. Super easy. That way you just measure it the one time on the first one, and then you can transfer that line across to the rest. Then I am going to get double-sided adhesive onto the backs of all of my panels. For my white panels, I'm going to run the adhesive orthogonal to my pencil lines, and on my pink panels, I'm going to run the adhesive, again, orthogonal to what I did on my white panels. That way, when you glue these two panels together, you have the adhesive kind of crisscrossing each other, and ultimately you'll end up that you'll have adhesive on all 4 edges close to the edge, and then a strip in the center going both up and down and left and right. Now, attaching the ribbon is really easy, but you do have to kind of be mindful of what you're doing. So I have a stretch of ribbon. I actually cut it longer than I ended up needing, but I ended up cutting it to, I think, 42 inches. And basically, what you want to start off doing is the 2 outside stretches of ribbon, they're gonna be going in the same direction with each other all the time. So right now they're both at the bottom. The middle one is always going to be opposite from the outer 2 before you glue down your next panel. And as you put a panel on, you need to wrap your panel with your ribbon. So here I have adhesive showing. I'm gonna alter between white and pink. So I'm going to put the pink down, and then I'm going to wrap my ribbon. So I'm bringing the 2 from the top down, the 1 from the bottom up, and no adhesive goes on that. I'm going to put my white down, peel up the liner, and I'm using the pencil marks that I drew earlier to make sure that my ribbon is nice and straight. And again, I'm going to wrap this panel with the ribbon, basically crisscrossing and making sure that the 2 outer ones are always aligned with each other. They're always on the same side, and the middle one is always opposite. And then I'll get the last, I did skip forward a little bit. I'll get the last panel in and burnish the entire time through. So you just keep on adding panels and alternating that ribbon, wrapping it back and forth, or in this case, up and down. And you only put adhesive basically on every other panel. And so when you're done, you have a Jacob's ladder that's ready to decorate, but this mechanism definitely works better with the more weight you have on each panel. So that's why I would definitely recommend getting it to a base point like I've done here, and then adding your mats and layers. That way you can actually see what how much more you need to add. So I'm going to add these lovely embossed panels. So I used the 3D embossing folder of the month to emboss some panels out of white and out of various shades of pink. And I'm basically going to alternate as well. So where I have a base of white, I'm going to put a pink panel. Where I have a base of pink, I'm going to put a white panel. And this just adds, well, for one, visual interest with that lovely embossed design, but more practically in terms of getting the mechanism to work better, it's going to add some additional weight. And the more weight you have, every time you see me pulling it off screen is because I'm playing with it to see, how much weight is it moving nicely. Now, do note that the ribbon that you see, it's actually not glued down, because remember I said we only glue every other panel down where the two panels get sandwiched together. So even though you see ribbon here, I'm actually able to tuck these panels underneath the ribbon because they aren't glued down. And you do want to be careful not to glue down your ribbon at all on the front. So do be mindful of that. And as you continue to add more mats and layers, and as you play with it more, it's going to flip more smoothly. And I'm not done yet. So I did use, actually I should mention, I did use Collel all-purpose glue when I was attaching my 3D embossed panels. And part of the reason why I chose that glue is because, well, for one, it's a liquid glue, so it definitely gives me time to adjust and move it around, which can be nice because I did have to slip these panels under that ribbon. But also that glue tends to, because it doesn't soak into your papers, it sort of dries as an extra layer. It does tend to add a little bit of extra weight and will help with the construction of all of this. If you wanted to sort of get the ground running with something a little bit heavier to start, you could, instead of just using heavyweight cardstock like I used 120 was my white, and my solid color cardstock is 100. You could use something like a lightweight chipboard or something like that is a little bit thicker and heavier weight, and that would help your mechanism operate a little bit more smoothly, because out of the gates you're starting with a little bit something a little bit heavier weight. I've die cut a ton of these flowers from the small die of the month, and as you saw in the preview, I have decorated every single one of these 6 panels front and back with these flowers. So it took a fair amount of time. I'll be honest, and I cut out a lot of footage just to skip ahead to the end, because I think you kind of get the gist of what I'm doing. All I'm doing is, for each of these panels, just creating these little nice mini cards, little vignettes. And the thing that I did for some of these that I think worked out kind of well is there's this one stem that's pretty long, and so what I did was I snipped it at the bottom and I glued a portion of it to one panel on the top, and then I continued it. So instead of like just tossing that little bit, I just continued that. I just glued that to the panel below. So it kind of looks like it's really flowing from one panel into the next. And once you get all of your panels decorated on one side, what I recommend you do when you decorate the back side is operate your Jacob's ladder to actually flip it. Have all those panels flip, and then decorate the back, which I've already done here. And the reason for that is when it flips, if you turn this back to the other side, it's actually going to be upside down, as you see there. So by operating it, you're going to ensure that you're decorating everything in the correct orientation. Okay, I'm definitely going to do another separate video that might be a little bit more detailed on just the Jacob's ladder. But for now, let's get into my pop-up card. So this card is going to feature the large die of the month, as well as the add-on that comes with it, which is this really this is a really adorable sort of honeycomb spoon. I don't think it's a spoon. I don't know what it's called, but it's really cool. I've cut it out of solid color cardstock, but what I've done is I'm just doing direct ink to paper, giving it a little bit of my brown inks, and I'm gonna do the same with this honey pot jar. And I decided to make my honey pot brown. I think in my head, I feel like that's the color of the honey jar in Winnie the Pooh. So that's what I think of when I see this. And so I'm just again doing some direct to paper inking to kind of give a little bit of dimension, so darken some of the edges a little bit. In the case of the brown, I actually used that same Versamagic ink in a lighter brown, and actually because that is a pigment ink, it sits on top, so it actually creates a little bit of highlight because it's a lighter shade of brown than the dark brown. And so I've got a lot of little things that are prepared here. This is a little bit more of that drippy honey that on my first card I cut out of foam to create a stamp to stamp with. But here I've actually used it as a die cut, and I'm just doing the same thing to ink up the edges a little bit so that it doesn't look quite as flat because I'm inking everything up. And that drippy honey is beautiful. It's so fun. It can be used on the side of the honey jar. It could be used in combination with that wooden kind of honey spoon. And so there's lots of different ways you can combine that. It's the perfect complement to the large die of the month. I've got the 2 dies that you can layer up to create the bee, and I've cut it out of several things here. I've got 1 layer out of vellum, 1 out of yellow. The yellow layer, I just snipped off the wings, and I'm going to glue that to the full vellum layer. And that gives the look of vellum, sort of clear-ish, translucent-ish wings of the bee. And the second die cuts out the additional layers that you can put on top to give that the black stripe detail of your bee. And it does come in 3. It's not just 1 die cut that you layer on top. It's actually 4 different pieces. It's 1 die, but it cuts out 4 die cuts that you need to layer. There's the head and the antenna, and then there's 2 die cuts that are the stripes on the body and some legs. And then there's a final die cut that you attach to the bottom, which is the little stinger of the bee. And I actually went back and die cut the wings from a second layer of vellum because one of the wings, so everything assembled the way I've done it here, the body is in front of both wings, but really one of the wings should be in front of the body, where the other wing is from behind the body, basically on the other side of the body. So just to pull off the illusion a little bit better, I did cut a second layer of vellum, and I'm just gonna attach it with some double-sided dotty sticky tape, and that has a little bit of a texture to it. You can see the little glue dots, but I think that's totally okay. And to bring the eyes to life a little bit, I did leave it. The die does cut out like a little circle where the eyes would be. I did leave that in, and then just used a white gel pen to add a little bit of a highlight, and that helps to kind of bring the bee to life a little bit, to have that little bit of a highlight there. Okay, so with my, I think I have most of the elements for my card now, and with my pop-up cards, what I like to do while everything is flat and there's nothing on the inside of the card, I do like to get the outside of the card or the card front sorted out first. And that just makes things a lot easier to do stamping and burnishing. And again, I'm trying to embrace that whole clean and simple, minimalistic, especially with pop-up cards. I do like to keep the outside nice and minimal because I feel like all of the fun should be on the inside of the card. So it's all the more, fun and exciting if the front of the card is just a little bit underwhelming. I think the contrast of the inside having a lot of the fun will really kind of maximize the effect of the inside. And as well, if this is a card that ends up being displayed, I think more likely it's going to be displayed open, where there's a lot of the fun element to it. So that's another reason why I kind of like to go a little bit more simple on the outside, because I feel like you're not going to be, especially if it is on display, you're not going to be really seeing a lot of it. So I've got everything positioned where I'd like, and you did see me move things around quite a lot. I did try a lot of different things, and to me, clean and simple and embracing white space is still kind of hard to do. So I don't know that I landed at the best spot for where to stamp the sentiment, because I very rarely put anything dead center. But for some reason, this seemed to work out best to my eyes anyways. But I would love to know your thoughts if you liked it in any of the other positions I tried, because I tried the bottom left corner, the bottom right corner. I tried it pretty much all over, and this is where I landed with that. Okay, so onto the inside of the card. This honey pot is really, really large. I should mention my card is 5x7 just to accommodate such a large jar of honey here, because I want this to be a part of a pop-up mechanism on the inside of the card, and it's very nearly the entire width of an A2 card. I think it's close to just over 4 inches. So this would be really hard to fit into an A2 card as a pop-up. Especially the way that I'm hoping to use it. I mean, there was barely enough room to fit it into this 5x7, and you'll see that in a moment here. But before I actually get this, my pop-up mechanism all sorted out, I want to kind of decorate this honey jar a little bit, because it's so big, and because I chose such a dark color, it felt like it needed something to kind of break up all of that dark. And what I decided to do is, there is a die that will kind of do some color blocking, where you can use it to die cut like the liquid contents, for example, of what would be on the inside of the honey jar. And it works out beautifully for that, but what I'm using it for is I created this label for my jar. So I used just that curve to cut out of the top and the sides, and then to get the bottom of that strip to also match the curve, I just did a partial die cutting using that same edge, but just die cutting the bottom of my label here. The die set also comes with some dies that kind of let you do some faux like twine that is tied around. Well, normally if this was going to be a closed lid jar, you would have that lovely, maybe some fabric. So there's a die that does help you to cut out that fabric cover to the jar, and it would be kind of tied closed with a bit of ribbon or twine. And so this die cut is meant to represent that, and it actually comes in two pieces. So you have just the twine that would be kind of wrapped around the mouth of the jar, and separately from that, because you could just use it like that, and I think that would be just fine, but there is a separate die that helps you to cut out the loops, like these right here, and I almost put it upside down. So you do have that as a separate die as well. So they just kind of add a nice fun little element to decorate your jar with. And the reason why I didn't use the actual cover, like that fabric cover to the jar, is because I want this jar to kind of appear as if it was open, because my pop-up mechanism is actually going to not just pop up the jar and, you know, kind of have that lift from the back of the card, but it's going to also be a wiper mechanism. And so I'm going to have a bee actually fly out of this jar and pop up as well, as a little bit of an extra surprise. So to start with the pop-up portion of the mechanism, I am just going to use some 120-pound cover weight heavyweight cardstock. You want something nice and sturdy, and you'll end up needing 2 strips. I have this strip, which I just cut down to about 3/4 of an inch tall. And I've got another bit of scrap that I am going to use as well. And when I start to make these pop-ups, I'm just sort of winging it. And I kind of understand like the mechanism of how these things go. So I don't really measure them until after the fact. So if you are customizing this to whatever shape you want to pop up, this is how you would do it. So I initially scored 3/4 of an inch. That's going to be a glue tab. And then I want to score a line that's going to be basically the width of the object that I want to attach or that I want to pop up from the back of the card. And then I score the same 3/4 of an inch. So that's basically how far away from the back of the card this is going to pop out. And then I score another 1/2 inch, and that will wrap around to the bottom and be a glue tab. And I will cut it off. Don't worry, actually later I'll have a screen where I tell you what the final measurements ended up being. But I am going to need a second one of these. So again, I'm just going to cut this bit of scrap down to about 3/4 of an inch tall. And I'm going to cut that or score that same 3/4 of an inch. That's basically the distance from the back of the card. And I actually want to do a second mechanism so that this honey jar, because it's so big, that it's actually supported at the top and at the bottom. So that's why I gave myself a little pencil mark so that I know I'm not scoring this so wide that it won't be hidden. So I want to try to hide as much of this as possible. So this piece ends up being 5.5 wide by 3/4 of an inch tall, and I scored it at 3/4 of an inch, 4 and 4 3/4. And the 2 tabs on the ends are going to be glue tabs. So those are the measurements that it ended up being for the shorter of the 2. For the first one, this one's longer. This piece measures 6 1/8 wide by 3/4 of an inch tall, and you want to score it at 3/4 of an inch, 4 7/8, and 5 5/8. So that gives you, and remember, same with this one, the 2 tabs on the far ends are glue tabs. Those will get adhered to the card front and to the inside card back. So that's it for the pop-up mechanisms, and I'll show you now how to attach it. And we'll get to the wiper mechanism once this is in place, because I find it a little bit easier to get this bit sorted and sort of completely adhered before adding the wiper portion of this. Now, you do want to make sure that when everything closes, that you can hide everything inside. And that bit of ribbon or twine, faux twine, that's hanging off the edge of the jar, that's going to stick out of the card. So I just decided to wrap that around to the back and glue it down rather than risk it just hanging out and then getting torn off. So I just want to dry fit, really make sure everything is going to fit. And because at this point you can still make adjustments and you can still change your pop-up mechanism. And the way that you would change it if you needed was, instead of 3/4 of an inch being the distance away from the back of the card, you can maybe shorten that to 1/2 inch. Just make sure that it's 1/2 inch on both sides of that long section. So I glued down that long section to the honey jar because that's where that's going to get secured. And then on this one side, that has just that single tab, I am going to glue that to the back front. I am butting it up against the score line, but being careful not to go over the score line. And I'm going to just kind of measure where I want to put my second pop-up. And again, I'm going to glue just that 3/4 of an inch tab, butting up against the fold, but not going over it. And I'm going to glue this to my honey jar as well, so that it helps to secure the honey jar because it's so big. And then I'm going to fold down the 2 remaining tabs. So you want to fold down the 2 remaining tabs, but you only want to put glue on the very end, on that, just the first segment. So that this, when you fold down the card completely closed, it's going to lay nice and flat so that if you do want to ship this card, you can. And that's it. I'm going to set it aside, give it some time to dry. Now I've got some acetate here. This is my heavyweight acetate. You could use maybe some thick plastic, maybe some packaging. And what I did was I just scored and folded just this little diagonal triangle on one end. So hopefully you can kind of see that triangle at the end there. And that angled fold is what's going to create our wiper mechanism. I'm using acetate because I want to make the bee feel like it's flying out from inside the honey jar. And to kind of pull off that illusion that the bee is airborne, acetate is great for that. If you're wanting to have something else fly across your scene that you don't need for that illusion of it flying or hanging out in midair, then you can always use heavyweight cardstock here. But what I'm going to do is, it's a little bit hard to see, but I'll get you a better angle in a moment when I glue this down. But when this bit of acetate is in its default state, it needs to be horizontal and hidden by the jar. So when it's unfolded, it needs to be hidden and horizontal. When you open it, it needs to fold and it needs to move in such a way that that the wiper mechanism swings upward. So you might just need to kind of dry fit a little bit, play with the mechanism a little bit to make sure that you have it attached the correct way in order to get the wiper mechanism to swing in the direction that you want. That just takes a little bit of experimentation. There's probably a rule for which way you want to angle that fold, but I always seem to do it just based on playing around with it a little bit. But I'm attaching it so you can see it gets attached to our pop-up mechanism. See the pink there? I left, on the other side, I left a little bit of red line tape just so that you can see this. So that is just that little bit of triangle. That's the only place there's adhesive, is that triangle that I scored and folded at the very end. That's the only thing holding this to the card, and it's getting attached to the back of our card front, right on top of that pop-up mechanism that I made earlier. That's kind of why I wanted to do the pop-up mechanism first, so that I can sort of dry run this and know exactly how long the pop-up mechanism needs to be, because it can only be as wide as that long stretch, basically the width of the honey jar, because it does need to swing down and get hidden behind the jar. And that way it can fold, this whole card can still fold down completely flat. And so now that it's in place, I am just gonna do my best to burnish that, because it's not a lot of adhesive. So you do want to make sure that you're using a nice strong adhesive. Red line's great, score tape is great, and burnish as best you can, just to really make sure it's well stuck. Then I'm gonna use some temporary tape to attach my bee to that acetate pop-up mechanism, and that's just so that I can preview the movement. And I've got him where I'd like him, and so I'm just going to now attach him more permanently to the acetate with a bit more red line tape. So I'm going to put the red line tape directly onto my acetate wiper, because that way I know it's going to land on the wiper, as opposed to putting it on the bee, and then, you know, if it's not completely lined up correctly and some of that adhesive hangs off of the acetate, it actually might glue down to your the back of your card, which you don't want. So best to adhere it to the acetate, and that's it. There's our bee popping up, and he's just like this extra little added surprise element where it's kind of fun to have that honey jar pop up, but I think it's a little bit of a nice surprise to see the bee coming out from inside of the jar. So that completes my pop-up card, and so now I'll give you a recap of all 4 cards that I made today. And don't worry, I know the Jacob's Ladder card did go pretty quickly, so I will definitely have a second separate video. I'll make a different card featuring that Jacob's Ladder mechanism. It's a lot of fun to do, so I'm excited to do it again, and maybe I'll just use a different size or dimension, or maybe I'll make it in a square format just so that you can see how that looks. But here's a recap of the I guess it ends up technically being 5 cards, although this layered card, it ended up having maybe like a little bonus card, because you know, for just spritzing down and doing like a second press without even re-inking, there's still quite a lot of ink there. So I think that turned out really nicely. And then I do have my Jacob's Ladder card here, and I'll show the video where you can hopefully see a little bit better how this looks all stretched out. It does end up being really thick, because it's, you know, 12 layers at least, actually more than 12 if you count mats and layers with the embossed panels too. So this is probably the kind of card that you might want to create an envelope box for, and maybe even hand deliver, or deliver with a gift in a gift box. But at the very tail end there, I did use the wax seal of the month, which I think is a nice little touch, because it adds a bit of weight to the bottom, which is kind of nice. And but I really love that the sentiment on the wax seal says "made with love," and this card is definitely a labor of love, because it took me several hours to complete it. So it's just a lot of prep work. It's not that it's hard to do, it's just a lot of decorating, because it ends up being 12 panels that you need to decorate. And I chose to decorate with a lot of die cut elements, so it was a lot of die cutting. And but it was a lot of fun, and I think well worth it, just because it's fun to play with this, and the more you play with it, the more smoothly it operates. My tip would be that if you make this as you're wrapping the ribbon, I found out afterwards as I'm playing with it that if you don't pull it too tightly, just make sure that it's not loosey-goosey, but don't pull it super tightly, because if there's just a little bit of play, then it actually operates a lot more smoothly. So having an extra thickness or some extra weight will help it operate smoothly, and then having just a little sliver of a gap, a little, just, I wouldn't even say a lot of slack, but just more that it's not super taut, because you can see the ribbon, where the ribbon, you know, is naturally there's a little bit of lifting between that and the panel. Those panels flipped a lot more easily, as opposed to ones where it's like super flat, almost touching the panels. So I would just make sure don't pull super tightly as you're wrapping the ribbon back and forth. And then my final card is this pop-up and wiper card, I guess, a pop-up wiper. Really, really fun. Nice little surprise to see that little bee popping out and flying out from inside the jar. So those are the cards that I made today. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know if you have a favorite among the 5 cards that I shared today. You'll find links to all of the Spellbinders club kits in the description box below. If you do shop my links, thank you so much in advance, because I do get a small commission from Spellbinders, and that comes at no cost to you. Thanks again, and until next time, happy crafting and have a fabulous day. Bye.